Anyway, so yeah, thanks for coming along, and you know, it takes a special kind of person to want to come and be depressed, but I'll try not to be too bad. No, I won't. I want to talk about the freshwater issues in New Zealand. I mean, and I'll no doubt I'll get carried away and start ranting and raving. But you know, even though I know all this stuff, when I start talking about it, I'm again kind of flabbergasted at what's happened here and how we let it happen. I talk about the drivers of the issues. I want to talk about this toxicity scam, nitrate toxicity scam, which is part of the legislation that's allowed a huge amount of more development to happen and a lot of worsening of water quality that happened under the previous government's reign. I am working on a number of working groups with the Ministry for the Environment, so I'm based in Wellington now. I'm away from Massey University, which is great because I copped a lot of difficulty in being an agricultural university and my work, you know, showing the impacts of agriculture. I need to reiterate that I didn't have any preconception about that. One of my first jobs was as a dairy farmer for a year or so, and I loved the life. It was later on that I got angry, and you know, it's so clear what's going on, and you'll see that yourselves. I want to even think about this idea of water quality, because I'm a freshwater scientist, and water quality rolls off the tongue, and I'm sure it means different things to different people. Of course, I'm in Nelson, so I need to talk about dams, and where we go to next is, you know, just to sort of finish off. So, whenever I talk about, you know, I guess the extremes when you think about the health of rivers and how you measure it, that one extreme is this idea of water quality, which is some kind of snapshot sampling of some chemical constituents of water that we do once a month that's somehow supposed to represent reality, and it doesn't, and I'll get into that. But at the other end of the scale is the freshwater fish who integrate everything that happens in the water, and they don't have anywhere to go when things get bad, or they can either die or get out of there, but that's the indicator that something's gone wrong. And so if you want to have the best way of telling the health of our freshwaters, then these statistics are the shockers. 74% of our freshwater fish are on the threatened species list. That is higher than I can find in any country in the world. And you know, I'm sure there's some countries that are worse, but they don't keep records. Our freshwater crayfish and kakahi are on that list as well. And so the bottom, this plot here says 1992. Here's this proportion of threatened species, and you can see it's just going up and up and up. Every classification it goes up, but there is another one that I've missed off the end of the graph that puts it up here somewhere. It's kind of plateaued. There's not many more that could come out. This graph at the top right here, this is index of biotic integrity. It's a measure of the health of waterways using the freshwater fish. For it to go down, fish have to disappear from the site, and there's 25,000 sites in that graph there. Just the decadal means here, but if we draw the line through it, and there's another one down here somewhere. I haven't updated these, but if you draw a line through this decline, then by 2050 we won't have any native fish if we keep going the way we've been going for the last few years. And if you want to think of it geographically, this is the best way of seeing clean green New Zealand from a freshwater point of view. These maps here look like colours, look like blobs of colour, but they're actually individual rivers if you could zoom in close enough. This is the river environment classification. It's a GIS layer that we use, and this is modelled data from those black dots, modelled out, and those. So anything that's red or orange is either moderately or severely polluted. And this is the Macroinvertebrate Community Index is probably the next best way, or the best way, of measuring the health of our waterways, because the invertebrates don't get to leave. So whatever's left after what's happened in the river, and they have quite long life cycles, you can get a really good feel for the state of rivers. So, and I'm pretty sure that most of you will know what's going on. This is Southland, Canterbury here, all the intensively farmed parts of New Zealand, Manawatu. You can't see it because the dots are all on top, but the Taranaki is really bad around the ring plain, starting off pristine from that national park and then degrading really quickly with the dairy farming that happens there, Waikato and Northland. So really clear what's going on, and of course there's some cities in there that are causing huge issues as well. And I think the best way to describe the state of our water is to think of it as we have the best and the worst, and those lakes really show it well. So there's 2,200 lakes in this graph, these two graphs here, just plotting nitrogen against phosphorus, the two key nutrients that we put on the land to grow grass, but when they get into water they grow algae, which is the water version of those plants. And so you see that we have so where you want to be is down the bottom left-hand corner here. We've got these amazing lakes here that are among the cleanest in the world, and then we have these lowland Waikato lakes that are among the worst in the world. And when you plot the countries here, then there's the Waikato lowland lakes right out the extreme there. And a bunch of other lakes that aren't included. I mean, this was David Hamilton's work from Waikato University, so he was concentrating on those lakes. But Lake Porowhenua in the North Island and some of the others are right out there as well. And when we look at the modelling and the lake work that's been done, then about 43% of our lakes have flipped into a worse state. They have a different trophic state, so they're officially listed as polluted. And 84% of those are in lowland catchments. It's a classic story. We have the best up in the highlands where we haven't done anything, and the worst in the lowlands. There's a lot of argument about where we sit in world comparisons around rivers, and this is one way of looking at it. This is the nitrogen flux going down a river. I'm going to talk a lot about nitrogen tonight, but it's one of the big issues. And there's been some famous debates about, how, including one academic who's gone on record as saying that the Waikato River is one of the cleanest rivers in the world. Here you see it in reality. So these are the kind of the best, some of the worst rivers in the world, and you can see the Waikato River's right up there, actually worse than, and the Manawatu River's worse than the Yangtze and the Mississippi, two of the most nutrient polluted rivers in the world. There's a whole bunch of ways of looking at how you measure the state of countries environmentally, and this is a really useful paper because we've got academics and the authors starting to bring in social issues as well. So social thresholds achieved is a positive. You want to have more of those things, so you want to be up here somewhere, but you don't want to have transgressed these biophysical boundaries, and a lot of work being done around these boundaries at the moment. So we're up here, we should be over here somewhere. So we've transgressed, 6 of these boundaries, and we're in a pretty poor line up there. Not many countries that are worse than us. And when you look at these measures, and there's a bunch of papers that have looked at different things, but if you look at biodiversity loss, water quality, marine captures, and fertiliser use, then we're among the worst. We're in the worst 20% of countries out of 180 or 190 in the world. When you look around the country to see where it's all happened, then it's really clear. You can sort of look at ecosystems, like you can look at species and come up with threatened ecosystems lists, and when you do that, then 68% of them are. And pretty simply, we have a third of the country in conservation estate, but it wasn't any kind of representative third. It's just the third that nobody wanted because they couldn't farm or build cities on it. So it's the mountains basically that we protected, and a bit of the west coast of lowland country. But so all these red areas are more than there's only 10% left of the indigenous cover, and with a lot of these areas, particularly around here, there's less than 1%. And my famous line has always been that, if you came to New Zealand looking for 100% pure New Zealand, you would get off the plane in Christchurch, jump in your camper van, you'd drive for an hour in any direction, and the chances of you seeing a single native plant or a single native animal would be 0. What you're seeing is 100% pure Europe, North America, with the trees and the plants and the grasses and the animals as well. But you can find 100% pure New Zealand. And I don't want to leave out the kind of urban element as well. We've got some shocking figures just recently out from some reports from Water New Zealand and others around wastewater treatment plants. So that's what WWTP stands for, wastewater treatment plants. 152 out of the 321 in the country discharge to fresh water, and only 7 of the 152 do not need an upgrade just to achieve attribute B in the National Policy Statement, which I'll talk about, which is actually a really slack standard around swimmability. So huge amounts of money. They've modelled, they've looked at the prices. The estimate is somewhere between $1.2 and $2 billion to upgrade those plants just to meet B. So the urban side of things is really slack as well. I just use this slide here just to remind people of just how much we've changed the landscape. So this is there's Foxton Himitangi out there, the Taurua Ruahine ranges here. So there's three colours basically on this map here. Native indigenous vegetation, wetlands, and the yellow colours dunes, and a bit of snow country on the peaks there. Pre-European, a couple hundred years ago and now. So what we did, this colour here is all pasture, the purple is exotic forestry, and we've got two colours of green now because we chopped down a whole lot of forest. We've got scrub and indigenous forest there now. But I show this to try and get you to think about not just how much we've changed the landscape, but about the wetlands. So that's what's left. So remember, that was what the wetlands were. That's what the wetland is left. Well, there's a couple of other little remnants, but so just thinking of it from a river health point of view, that I'm sure you will have heard that wetlands are the kidneys of the freshwater systems. They're the purifiers, they absorb flood flows, they have all of these values that we talk about. And so you can imagine, if you think about a river health point of view from a human perspective, how healthy you would be with 98% of your kidneys gone, and then you go and go on a diet of Coke and fries and things, because that's what my analogy, my similarity of what we do to the landscape with adding nutrients to it afterwards. It's like taking a sick person and then filling them up with sugary drinks, because we just pour all this stuff on. But many authors have talked about this, what a loss it is. But of course, for Māori, they were everything. They were the pharmacy, they were the food supply. Everything came from those wetlands. They were so valuable, for all sorts of reasons. But so, just to give you some numbers, to give you some idea of what the loss might be, lots of global studies now and in New Zealand show that if you want to replace what a wetland does for you in dollar terms, it would cost you around $40,000 a hectare a year, or the wetlands are worth $40,000 a hectare a year for us, roughly. And so when I did the calculations, I've just been part of an ongoing Ngāti Raukawa, which is the iwi covering this kind of area here from Poirua up to Rangitikei, with their treaty claim. And so something like $8 billion worth of ecosystem services lost by taking away those wetlands. And okay, you can't bank this stuff. $40,000 a hectare sounds fantastic, it's what it does for us. But if you turn it into a dairy farm, then when the price is really, really good, you could make $6,000 a hectare. $6,000 a hectare private gain versus $40,000 worth of public loss is another way of thinking of it. And the other thing was that I looked at the eels as well. So from the remaining wetlands, we've got some numbers from surveys that myself and others have done, and I used that to work back as to how many eels would be there if those wetlands were still there. Came to about 74,000 tonnes of eels is about the mid-value within some quite big range of what was missing, what we've lost from there. Okay, so what happens? This is like where the problems are. This is a slice across, sort of through Canterbury, going from the hills out to in the Rakaya River. So just sort of looking at, and the darker the colour, the more nitrate is lost from the system. And so you can see sheep loses a bit, dairy loses heaps, a bit from forestry, and then cropping really serious amounts from the intensive cropping at the end here. And then if you look at where it comes from, then this is mainly what it's about. We put nitrogen fertiliser on the land to grow the grass, the cows eat it, some of it goes out in milk, some goes out in nitrous oxide, and some of it leaches through from fertiliser, but basically it's mostly about what comes out in urine. And it's the urine patches from the cows that's the issue. Big gush of, have a look at a cow taking a pee sometime, big gush of urine, small area of land, the plants can't possibly take it up, especially in Canterbury, stony soils, straight down into the aquifers and through via the aquifers into the rivers. And so you get this as kind of around the average value for dairy farming in New Zealand, per 45 kilograms of nitrogen per hectare per year. And then what it looks like. Well, this is a bunch of water quality measures, but this is E. coli here. So this is kind of the pathogens in rivers. There's a couple of nitrogens, phosphorus, But what I'm trying to show here is that there's just this really, really similar pattern. There's this pattern of the same places with the same kinds of issues coming from the same land use. And they're not just about freshwater issues as well. There's also greenhouse gas emission issues as well that we really have to be cognizant of. So what happened was the government realised there was a problem. The previous one, so in 2012-ish, the National Policy Statement for Freshwater came out. So that's what the NPSFM, National Policy Statement for Freshwater Management, came out. Around 20 years too late, because it was supposed to come out when the RMA could have started, but it didn't. And as I'll show you, the drivers of the problems are not addressed in there. It actually allowed more intensification. And at the heart of it was that the science was lost from the policy. The things that were put into the National Policy Statement were just cherry-picked so that it would allow more development and didn't take into account the science. So to give you an example, what should be in there, because the National Policy Statement is quite clear about protecting human health and ecosystem health. So here's a bunch of the things that we know are crucially important and that we can measure. And here's what we actually put in there, what actually ended up in the National Policy Statement: nutrients, but I put an asterisk there because I'll explain why it just completely fails. And pathogens being one indicator, which is E. coli, which is an indicator of gut bacteria in the system, but there's a whole bunch of other human health issues that I'll show you that didn't end up in there. So there's these compulsory values that didn't turn up. I want to talk about this nitrate toxicity red herring. So limit setting on a false premise is what I called it. And it got misinterpreted by regional councils. For example, ECAN came up with this 3.8 milligrams of nitrogen per litre in their plans as a bottom line limit, and I'll show you just how extreme that is. But at the heart of it is science, legitimate science, where toxicologists will put a tank in a lab and have temperature and oxygen and everything else perfect, because you want to do this nice controlled experiment, and some fish swimming around it, and add nitrogen until a certain percentage die. Okay, totally legit piece of work. So you add the stuff, and it turns out that at 6.9 milligrams, there's an LDL 20% of the fish die, and it works on a bunch of fish and invertebrates. It comes out around 6.9 milligrams. So that's the bottom line for nitrate toxicity that ended up in the National Policy Statement for Freshwater, and I'll show you where these numbers come in. But what it completely missed was the fact that at much, much lower levels of nitrate than that, the fish die through secondary causes of growing algae, and the algae taking the oxygen out of the water, and they're dying. And so my colleague Russ Stead used this analogy on Radio New Zealand one time. It's like having a drink driving limit, which is the toxic amount of alcohol in your bloodstream. You know, so when it kills you, that will be the limit. This is pretty much what it's done, you know. Having the toxic limit is just so much of a scam. And I'll talk about some of these claims of improvement that came for that. And including on the LAWA website, you can go to these sites and you can see how these rivers score an A for nitrate toxicity, because basically every river in New Zealand scores an A, all but a couple of sections, because it's such a weak limit. So you go to the LAWA website, if you look at your river for nitrate, it says it's an A, and everyone thinks, well, A, that's fantastic, you know. But I'll sort of try and explain what that means. So what's got chopped off my scale here is, I don't know why it's done this, but okay. What nitrate toxicity is all about is excess nitrate coming into the system, growing periphyton, which is algae. The algae photosynthesizing, taking up oxygen, releasing it at night, and you get this oxygen variability, and you get these oxygen extremes. So here's that map again of where those extreme areas are. Here's an example of what it looks like. This is from Horizons Regional Council, a site on the Manawatu River, where they have a dissolved oxygen meter that clicks over every 15 minutes and registers, and you can see through winter it's quite stable. Here's 100%, this is kind of healthy-ish. And you can see in summer, when the algae grows, you start to get these massive fluctuations happening. I'm going to come back to this slide. So, here we go. So here's your scale. Here's 0 to 11.3. At the moment, the world and our maximum available value, the maximum allowable value in drinking water is 11.3 milligrams. That's the blue baby limit. We call it the blue baby because it's based on effects on babies when they're not long after being born, maybe the first 6 months when they're adapting to their own oxygen supply from their mothers, and if they have high levels of nitrogen or over that level, then the nitrogen bonds instead of hemoglobin, and they can die from lack of oxygen. So this is the blue baby thing. Here's the national policy statement, bottom line, the 27% toxicity, 6.9. Here's that Manawatu River where these fluctuations had, and there's a picture of it. That's right down here at 0.64 milligrams. The median there is 0.64 milligrams. And under our previous system, for the ANZAC, Australia and New Zealand guideline limit for nuisance algal growth was 0.44 milligrams. So down where it should be. What the government did was the previous government did was to shift it up to 6.9. So you can see how it just completely fails to do it. So here's the band. So there's an A up to 1, a B up to 2.2, and a C up to 6.9. So the fish in these extremes here are dead down at this level. They can't die again. You can't die again at 6.9 milligrams when it gets up there because they're already dead. So it's meaningless that nitrate toxicity comes in. And to put that into context, those two really polluted rivers, the Yangtze and the Mississippi, would score a B under our new system. And this was sold to us as a fresh start for fresh water. So you've got to watch these lines when they come out. They sell it to New Zealand just before the 2013 election. They were telling us that water quality was improving in New Zealand, and this fresh start for fresh water. Okay. I'm going to talk also about colorectal cancer, and I'll come back to that. But to show you how stupid that level is there, 2.2, there's a 15% increase in the probability of getting colorectal cancer if drinking water gets to that level. This is from a massive study out of Denmark, 9 million people over 25 years, so a huge longitudinal study, and they found that a 15%, and down here at 0.87, there's a significant increase in the chance of getting colorectal cancer. And you can see how that fits into those bands. And I'm going to talk about it, but I think it's really, really important that people, this may be the turning point that, it's just ecosystems, it's just fish, but when it becomes human health and cancer, then I'm hoping it will change. So just to show you what that looked like, this is when the Freshwater National Policy Statement came out. Here's that same map I've been showing you. All those dark red and dark orange areas exceed that ANZAC guideline limit, and then they shifted it. Look, they made the whole country go green. So everywhere that's dark green is an A. You had a few Bs around Canterbury here, and you had 1 or 2 Ds down in the Hines Ashburton area. So that's how you clean up the country. They did exactly the same thing with human health, with pathogens, so swimmability. So all of these orangey red areas here exceed the Ministry of Health guideline of 260 colloquial units per litre. They shifted it to 1,000. This was Nixmas Classic, going from swimmable to wadable. And then you had this lovely turn the maps green again, where you've solved the problem. Unluckily for him, but luckily for us, there was a huge uproar about that, and they've since changed it back to swimmability, but they still couldn't do it without cheating, and it's actually back at 540 now, not back at 260. So they've put the word swimmable back again, but they haven't shifted the number back again. They've dropped it, and hopefully I can explain that. So here's another one. So just before Nick left, I hope some of his friends are here tonight. And by the way, if there's anybody kind of kicks up about why am I here helping the Green Party out, I'm very happy to turn up and do exactly the same for the National Party anytime they want me to get along. Completely open to, I've always had that open for them. Okay, so there's clean water. He came out with this amazing We're going to have 80% of our waterways swimmable by 2030 and 90% swimmable by 2040. Does everyone remember this? Yeah, fantastic, okay. But it only applies to lakes greater than 1.5 k in diameter, which is, it only applies to 25% of our lakes, so 75% can just carry on how they are. It only applies to fourth order or larger waterways, so that is 12%. So this order system is, for those of you who don't know, when the river starts off, the first order is the first bit that starts to flow. When two first orders get together, you get a second order. It stays a second order until another second order join it and then becomes a third order. And so you can imagine in a river network that, think about it in your mind like a tree and the trunk part of it being a ninth order river. You know, so you have, and you added up the length of all the branches. It's massive in the lower orders and much smaller in the higher orders, so that's where you get that 12%. So only 12% of it is fourth order or higher in New Zealand, and we've got all the data to show this. Already 70% of those 12% are swimmable, so actually all they have to do is get 20% of 12%, which I can't do in my head, but must be about 3 or 4%. So what this actually means is we'll make 4% of waterways swimmable. So good how you can turn 90% into 4% that you have to actually do. And to give you an idea about how that shift from 260 to 1,000 and then back to swimmable at 540 actually works. So the guys at NIWA ran this through their National Water Quality data set to see how those shifts would change the number of sites that would be swimmable under, looking backwards at the data that we already had. And under the original National Policy Statement, 42% of them would have been swimming. Under this new thing, 83%. So it's the same rivers in the same state, but because you shift the rules, then suddenly 83% of them are swimmable because going from 260 to 540. So, you know, it was a con on a con on another con. And just to put that in US EPA, then, you know, even the US EPA would be much more stringent than this clean water package that came out. So just, you know, it's just the conning of the public. It's just corrupt, I think. Okay, I want to just quickly go to a Canterbury case study to give you an idea of just how this failure to protect fresh water risks all of us, and how it's about taking money now and leaving it for the future for the kids to deal with. And there's all kinds of issues around the ministers that were involved in this, also owning huge chunks of land in this country that somebody needs to look into at some stage as well. So this regional plan policy, which is about the 3.8 milligrams, which I'll talk about, you've got declining water quality happening there. We've got the highest rates of zoonotic diseases anywhere in the developed world in Canterbury already. Our highest rates of Crohn's and a whole bunch of other diseases there. We've got massive biodiversity loss, like I said. In many parts, less than 1% of Indigenous cover left there. We've got, with all those irrigators going in, you've had all the shelter belts knocked down. There were masses of stone walls, the old stone walls where they picked up all of the stones out of the paddocks and made walls out of them that were fantastic habitat for lizards and all that kind of thing. Well, the irrigators can't run over them, so they got rid of all those as well. The drinking water degradation that I'll talk about, this of reliance on models, which is this overseer model, which is how we try to model the nitrate loss from the system, and there's a lot of problems with that. This idea of fair representation, you'll hear it talked about a lot, and I believe it's happening here as well with flagged groups or something like that. They have Waitua in Wellington and they have zone committees in Canterbury. This idea that you just go to the community and you ask for community, right? So I've been involved peripherally in the Ruamahanga Waitua, which is a community engagement process in the Wairarapa. And I looked at their final outcome. It's all over. They asked the community what they wanted. The community said, we want our rivers to be A's. And they had no idea that an A means nothing. That the Yangtze can get an A almost, you know. So, but it highlights perfectly how the councils set up these things. The public turn up, and some people are engaged, but But the paid people are all from the council and from industry and have all the science and all the resources. The public have to turn up in their own time and be involved. And nobody had explained to them what I just explained to you tonight. So of course, being rational human beings, they thought an A must be really good if we go for an A, without knowing that they were already all A, and that being an A is meaningless. It just shows you how these processes sound fantastic, but they only work if the public are up to speed on what's going on. It's only if you get some independent science in there, and not having the council and the council running it all, and the council scientists and the council consultants doing it. And this is where ethics comes into it as well, I think. But this debt burden as well. So it's a really good example from work that I'm doing with Landcorp. So I'm on this environmental reference group with Landcorp, so I can get hold of some of these figures. And my really good friend and colleague, Alison Jews, who's the environment manager there now, who was on the environmental reference group with us, can show that from one of their farms they can meet their targets that ECAN has given them for nitrate loss by 2035. They can do that in 1 year, easily, in 1 year, because they aren't that tough. Despite, if you ask anyone else, any other farmer, they'll scream and tell you it's the end of their business and everything, but they could do it in one year. But it meant, so they could halve their nitrate loss by completely changing what they do on the land. Still milking cows, but less of them. But it knocked 20% off the land value of that property. So it's the capital loss that will kill it. So you do the right thing and you lose land value. But what was worse than that is because these consents are global consents, they're held by the irrigation company. Irrigation supplies you the water, irrigation company supplies you the water. It also manages the consents. So if farmer A here, which is Landcorp, one of their farms, saves 50%, it just gets handed out to the other ones because you've got a global consent. So, there's no gain for the environment. There is a loss of land value of 20%, and this is under ECAN's plan, and they think this is the best plan ever. Okay, so this is, if you haven't found this, look for it. The Conversation, it's Australian, New Zealand. We have our own science editor here, Veronica Meduna, some of you will know her. The Conversation. So we wrote this article just a month or so ago, myself, not this article, sorry, this article here, myself and Michael Baker from Otago Medical School, who's a professor of health there, looking at what's happening in Canterbury, but based on this study here. That's the one that I talked about, the big longitudinal study that came up with those numbers, 9 million people over 25 years. And here's but what we showed was that, so taking those numbers, it's just under 1 milligram is the significant risk and 2.1 is the 15% risk. So what I did was, that prize that Matt mentioned that I got for Critic and Conscience came with 50 grand. The Critic and Conscience Award, not 50 grand for me to pay the mortgage off, unfortunately, but 50 grand I could use. So I spent half of it on a nitrate meter. That's the best you can buy, so that I can take water samples and get a really accurate measure of nitrate without having to send it to the lab. Jumped in a truck with some guys from Fish and Game, and we drove around Canterbury for a couple of days, and we just went to every little town we could find and went to the public loos or the race course or whatever and filled up a sample with the tap water that was in that town. A whole bunch of people brought their samples in as well from on their properties. We ended up with 113 samples. This is them here from rural Canterbury, north and south. And you can see that most of them, more than half, exceeded that 2.1, which is the 15% increase in risk of getting colorectal cancer, and 80% of them exceeded the significant risk level. Then I managed to track down 440 water quality samples from Christchurch City itself. This is from Christchurch City Council, and I've just plotted them there. So about a third of them exceed the 15% limit, and then about half of them exceed the significant risk area. So the bunch that are down here, I gather, are from that really deep bore, 180 odd metres deep, but everyone else is in this danger area here. Remember, our maximum allowable value under current legislation is up here somewhere. So, this is new. This only came out this year. It's going to take a long time to shift the Ministry of Health. I ended up in a nasty little spat with a couple of people from Ministry of Health the other day. They gave a presentation to a working group that I'm on at Ministry for the Environment about this issue, and they talked about risk. And when I tried to nail down what risk they were talking about, it's not the risk to us, it's the risk to the water suppliers. If they come in with a tougher limit, the risk to the water supply companies or councils on how much it will cost them to change what they're doing. That's their idea of risk. I could not believe it. And they looked me in the eye and said, that's what the way it is. So there'll be a very slow process of changing the values. And actually, Michael Baker, my co-author, got hold of the authors of the Danish study and said, is Denmark going to change its limits? And they said, we don't think so. It will take a while. It's always this, but that's just one study story. And this is just one study, but it follows up a whole series of studies that have been showing these kind of levels, one from Spain. But this is the only one, and it's only in these really well-off, developed, well-off countries that you can collect these kind of data sets. There'll be, it's just like, you can't say you don't. You can say you don't have the evidence, but there's not the evidence because we haven't collected the evidence, not because it's not real. Anyway, look at this graphic here. Look down on the bottom right. That's the years ticking over. This is some work that I've just done, and you can see some orangey dots here. This is dairy farms. So this is time, and these are dairy farms, and this is just the consent data from the regional council showing the spread of farms in Canterbury. And all of this enabled through irrigation. So you just, they were all pretty much all sheep and beef and cropping areas, but because that you have that water available, then you can do that conversion. And this is the McKinsey country stuff happening here. But that's how quickly that happened, and that was during that. The last 10 years of it was after Nick Smith had sacked the council, the regional council, and replaced it with commissioners. So that shows you how quickly things can go bad. And when you saw the water quality, it's just the shallower the bore, the shallower the aquifer, the higher the amount of nitrate in it is, working its way down into the deeper stuff. This is just the beginning of a nightmare, because all of these people, this is where we drove around. So a huge proportion of these people here are going to have alternative water supplies given to them. I mean, and what really frustrates me is that I would be the most popular guy, I bet, at Coca-Cola. They would love me, because what's happening is that everyone's switching to bottled water. Not just Coca-Cola, but whoever. The corporates that get our water for nothing, for free, because of this no one owns water story, which is bullshit, as we all know, because people are paying huge amounts of money for it. You go buy some bottled water, it's more expensive than petrol in most cases, and these people get the best for nothing. And you get these stories coming out about, water bottling is just a tiny proportion of all of the water that's taken in New Zealand. And it is, but it's a really high proportion. You can see from those graphs, there's not much that's the really clean stuff, and that's what they take. They don't want the stuff that's polluted already with nitrogen. They get the best. The rubbish gets given to the New Zealanders. And it's purely because no one's wanted to take on the politics of the councils can't charge for the water because the government says that no one owns water, so of course you can't charge for it. Have a look online if you want at a site called Hydro Trader. It's the Canterbury kind of like a share market where they buy and sell water rights in Canterbury. Millions and millions of dollars being traded in water that no one owns, supposedly. And it's purely because of the politics of not wanting to take on treaty issues about who owns water in New Zealand that's allowed this, which is this kind of really sad effect of me highlighting these problems. And so this is just some of the sample boards from Regional Council for 2016. So these are the nitrogen. So everywhere, even the blues are greater than 3 milligrams, right? Less than 3 milligrams. So some of them could, still be well above that 15% thing. But anything that's not blue, it is higher than 3 milligrams. And remember, it's 2.1, that's the cancer 15% chance. So you can see that massive areas of Canterbury. And these ones here with the red diamonds are the increasing trends. The grey areas are no trend, and it's just a statistical thing that there just haven't been data collected for long enough for there to get to be a trend. And the only ones that are decreasing are the blue upside down triangles. So a few that are decreasing, mostly they're on the way up. Okay, so I've had a go at dairy farming, and of course everyone will want to come back at me and say, but it's the backbone of the economy, isn't it? No, they'll just say it is the backbone of the economy. They won't put that in, isn't it? So, I mean, I've done this study myself, and colleagues, this study here that was published in an international journal, and we showed there that if dairy had to pay even some of its environmental damages, its cost for the damage that it's doing, then it would be a no-sum gain. You just wouldn't bother. As much as it brings in, supposedly, you would have to pay to fix what it was doing. And then I thought I'd show this study, which comes from Scion. Now, this is just a chunk of the North Island, 28,000 hectares of the North Island Central Plateau. And they just did this little study here looking at land values, employment, pollution stuff down here, and then worked out an externality for it. So an externality is something that's whether it costs or gains the country after you take all the costs out of it. And what they came up with was that $31 million for having pine forest there, and I'm not promoting pine forest, but this is just because it was Scion, our CRI for forest, they did it. And look at this, $18 million for dairy, but it's minus $18 million. So the externalities for dairy on that piece of land, on that area of land, is minus $18 million. But no, $7 carbon price, it's now $20-something. So this will be more like minus $40-50 million for dairy compared to forestry in that same area. This is the backbone of our supposedly our backbone of our economy. And when I say if they paid their way, because they're not. All we're doing is just letting that nitrate build up in those aquifers and rivers. We're not doing anything about it. And just to give you an idea of the cost of it, I don't know how many of you realise this, but for 2 lakes in New Zealand, we are trying to protect them from the nitrate loss from dairy farming. So Lake Taupo and Lake Rotorua, we've spent around $130–40 million. We've already spent it in the Lake Taupo case, and they've paid farmers not to intensively farm, and then the bit that was left over is there's a cap on it, and then it's traded among the farmers there. In Lake Rotorua, it's just started. There's $40 million to get 100. So the model is the scientists have said we need 100 tonnes less nitrogen going into this lake a year to save Lake Rotorua. Okay, they go back to the landscape and say, right, we need 100 tonnes less going in there. We've got $40 million, mostly taxpayers' money, to pay you not to pollute. It's only a handful of farms. It works out to $6 or $7 million per farm that we pay for dairy farmers not to farm in that Lake Rotorua catchment to protect that lake. And think about it, so what's so special about those 2 lakes? Why do we pay people not to pollute those 2 lakes? I don't know, you can figure it out. I guess because it's tourists. The rest of our lakes don't count, right? Or, they aren't that bad, in the touristy areas, I guess. That's the difference. But if you applied that same rationale to protect our rivers and the rest of our lakes, then you work it out on that average nitrate loss from farming systems, which is well accepted on Dairy New Zealand's website. Multiply that by what they're paying, which is $400 a kilogram a year to not pollute those lakes. It comes to roughly $24 billion is what we have to pay farmers to not farm to protect our rivers per year. Or we're subsidising them $24 million a year to carry on farming and doing what they're doing.
Is that billion more?
Oh, sorry, I'm jumping. $24 billion, sorry. Yeah, correct. $1 billion. Okay, so just to sum that up, we've got really big issues with water quality, and I didn't really touch on this, but I want to just quickly touch on it now. This idea of water quality, it's a bunch of chemical samples, and we go out monthly. I want you to think about this. Imagine if you wanted to know what the rainfall was at your house, and you've got a rain gauge, and on the first Monday of every month you go put the rain gauge out, and then you bring it back in again. And then the next month you put it out for 1 day, and then you bring it back in again. How long do you think you'd have to do that before you got some measure of the actual rainfall at your house? But that's what we do in rivers. We monthly sample a snapshot in time of what happens at that river. Remember the graph I showed you of the oxygen fluctuation happening over time in the Manawatu River? It's going from 160 some days down to 30, and 160 and 30, day and night. The technicians from the regional council come along with their dissolved oxygen meter at lunchtime and stick it in the river and go, oh, 100%, that's great. Think of the stupidity of that. If they'd been there at 4 o'clock in the morning, it would have been 30. If they went there at 5 o'clock at night, it would have been 160. But we do that. We call that water quality measurements. And regional councils and TDC and Nelson City will put out graphs and show you, what's improving and what's getting worse based on monthly samples like that. It makes no sense scientifically whatsoever. I think it's a combination of things. It's a manager's way of measuring, because you just send out your technicians once a month. You can do some stats on that. It's a leftover thing from, we started doing that in New Zealand in 1989, and it's carried on since, and we've got way better technology and way better knowledge now, but we still do it that way. And I think, and this is controversial, but that it's because we don't want to know. That's why. You only do stupid measures like that when you don't actually care. So I pointed out how that national policy stuff. I need to also mention that when you take that water sample, if you're looking at nutrients like nitrate, nitrogen and phosphorus, think about it. You're taking it out of the water column. You just put your jar in and you fill it up with water and you take it to the lab. If there's a whole lot of algae growing in the river, like Matt mentioned that's happening in the Maitai at the moment, then that algae needed all that nitrogen to grow. Where did it get it from? It got it out of the water column. So when you sample the water column, you're getting the residual. You're getting what's left over after the algae's had what it needed. So you can go, your council can tell you, fantastic, the nitrogen levels are really low in the Maitai River at the moment. Well, of course it is, because it's all there in the algae. And it's the same with the phosphorus. If they say, oh, we've sampled the phosphorus and there's no phosphorus in this river, because you're measuring it because you want to know if it's going to grow algae. There's no phosphorus in the river, but all this algae's growing. Well, of course it is, because it grows on the bed of the river where the sediment is. All of the phosphorus is bound up in the sediment. The algae can have all it wants from the sediment. It doesn't need it in the water sample. So the water sample of nutrients is meaningless when you're supposed to be measuring them to see what algae is going to grow, but you've actually they've already had what they need and you're measuring what's left over. I hope you get what I mean. It's bizarre. And if you're paying these guys to do this, So what happens is you get that massive fluctuation like you do at that site in the Manawatu River, where it has the worst ecosystem, gross primary, there's a calculation you can do on this variability. Joe's in here somewhere, he could explain to you how it works. And then you can come out with this number, okay, and it tells you the health of the river based on that function that's happening. It could have been switched off here. It's on my screen, I can still see it. Oh no, it's back. So you can have this, and so 0 to 3 is a healthy river, 3 to 7 is a satisfactory river, and anything greater than 7 is considered an unhealthy river. The Manawatu River at 2 sites scores 107, which is higher than's been measured anywhere else in the world. The Cawthron at the time did the study of 570 sites. Well, they got data from 570 sites in New Zealand and around the world. The highest anywhere else was 63 or 7 or something in Belgium on a river below a wastewater treatment plant. So this Manawatu River scores 107 at 2 sites, never been measured, and yet it scores an A on everything in that national policy statement. I talked about those huge issues with the wastewater infrastructure, not just the wastewater treatment plants, but you've also got all the pipe work that gets to them that's headed as well. And like I think the key to the core of the problem is that these regional authorities, your TDC and Nelson City and all of them, their job is to protect the environment, but their job is to protect the economy as well. How is that going to work? How can you expect them to be doing that? And they're reporting on themselves as well. So they write the report, they collect the data, I mean, I've always said it, if I applied that system to my students and just said at the end of the year, you write me a report on how you've done this year, you know, I bet they'd all get an A+, wouldn't they? And that's what these councils have. Why would you expect anything else to happen if you set it up like that? We have to take monitoring and assessment, or at least the reporting of it, away from councils and have it done by an independent authority, some kind of really truly independent EPA that could do that. Anyway, I'm probably running out of time, but I just wanted to touch on irrigation and dams. And this is some of the myths that I'd like to have a go at, because these are the things that I see said by the dam promoters, and a lot of them are, like Irrigation New Zealand got a job with a pocket full of money to just go around and find places to put dams and support dams. And the old story like, you know, when you've got a hammer in your hand, everything looks like a nail. When you've got $400 million in your back pocket, everything looks like a good place for a dam as well. So you get the story about, we need a dam to save our river. And it's going to be great for the river because the river's, you know, got no water in it. Well, the river's got no water in it because you over-allocated it. How can the fix be doing more of the thing that caused the problem in the first place? I mean, that's what we do with a whole lot of things, like economic things. We have a crash, so we just do more of the same and then wonder why we crash again. I mean, it's just bizarre. It's not going to mean better water quality unless you assume that the natural flow of that river wasn't, of course the natural flow of the river is what the river, its landscape, its geomorphology and the life in it adapted to. Are you going to come along and tell me that, oh, it would be better if that river had a constant flow over time? No, it won't be, because the life isn't evolved to that constant flow. And if you want to add water into it, which is, you know, what they say, so at low water flows we'll have water in there when it wouldn't have. Well, that's only because you took that water out of there in the first place that it's going to make it work. Climate change mitigation. Oh, well, what happens is, and that Canterbury's a fantastic example of this, you add irrigation, you intensify like hell, you put more animals on the land, you put more infrastructure on the land, more dairy sheds, more all of that stuff. You don't become more resilient, you become less resilient. And you get dams like the Opo, I've got a picture coming out where they did that, and then they have a drought for a few years and the dam dries up as well, and you don't have any water to do all that stuff that you told people you were going to do to save the river, because you don't have any in the dam to do it. The dams were good for the economy. My colleague Peter Fraser has shot that to pieces many times. He could tell you about that. I mean, I already talked about this community collaboration, and the same thing happens with irrigation. You convince people that if you put a dam in, there's going to be all these jobs and it's going to be all fantastic, without ever having to justify that. They do the same kind of thing with lots of other things like stadia as well. This other claim, oh, you know, you're just crazy, you want to have pristine waterways, you know, get real kind of thing. Well, I don't, no, I just want healthy waterways. They don't have to be pristine, they just don't have to be dead, that's all, you know, and we just want them to be swimmable and hopefully drinkable as well. And this other, you know, classic, you can't feed the world without irrigation. Well, you can't feed the world when you've destroyed the land and you've filled up the aquifers with nitrate and can't drink it, and you've got heavy metals in the soils and all that kind of stuff. You know, this feed the world argument is a pretty weak one. It's a short-term feed the world. And that's what the Opua Dam looked like a couple of years ago. That was going to be the saviour for this part of the country as well. It just dried up. And this is kind of just a quick little touch on the kind of impacts of dams, and they're very, very complex, and I won't go through all these things, but they have massive, massive consequences, and there are much better ways of keeping water on land, of being able to use the land that are sustainable and resilient and don't need massive infrastructure like dams, and there's a whole bunch of them that I can go through if you wanted to, but I've been taking this photo. This is just a whole bunch of, mostly when you have stuff online now, but I pulled these out of my filing cabinet just to show, you know, the balance between the amount of research that shows the impacts of dams versus the papers and reports that show some positive outcomes. And I'll just quickly just touch on a bit of, if I hadn't doomed you enough, I want to totally doom you out here, because this stuff just frustratingly doesn't make the mainstream media. This came out late last year, or in the middle of last year. And it's actually up to 25,000 scientists now with this dire warning that we are in the shit. And if we don't change drastically what we're doing, we don't have a future. And when 25,000 scientists tell you that, then you should start listening, because they're the most conservative people in the room. And these are the kind of I just chucked down a bunch of the threats that we have. Here's a picture of Canterbury and some of the lovely land use that happens down there. The nitrogen bomb, because I've been talking about nitrogen all night. There's another sad side to nitrogen, that the nitrogen that's doing all that problem comes from fossil fuels. So right up until the 80s, when I was back then, when I was milking cows, we didn't put stuff on the land. We just farmed what the land could support in the way of cows. Then in the 70s, we had the Shell it was Shell and some other oil company at that time that offered to do that work off the Taranaki coast, find the gas, get it to us. The deal was a take or pay scheme. They said to the New Zealand government, we'll find it, here it is, but you've got to take it at this amount or you'll pay for it anyway, a take or pay. Way more than we could use at the time, or probably could now even. So the government had to come up with a whole bunch of ways of using it. One was the Kapuni ammonia urea plant, where they took natural gas and turned it into nitrogen fertiliser, which started off the whole industrialisation of farming in this country, to use up that gas that we were going to pay for anyway. So that's when the rot started. And now you have the situation, so this nitrogen bomb I'm talking about is that this massive population that the planet has at the moment, mostly the green revolution that you hear about, a big part of that is taking fossil fuels and turning it into food. That's how we've got this crazy population that we have now on this planet, and it's coming to an end. And so we somehow have to figure out how we feed all those people with that. That's the nitrogen bomb. We've got the greenhouse gas emissions, nitrous oxide and methane from animal agriculture, peak phosphorus as well. So we've got problems with getting phosphate. We've got we've been mining it from all over the world. In our case, most of it came from Nauru. We destroyed some Pacific islands so we could have our nice dairy farms here. We've got antibiotic resistance. More than 50% of the antibiotics that are used in the world are on animal agriculture. We've got the animal health and welfare. We've got the mycobacterium issue that's happening here, costing us millions and millions of dollars. We've got the human health issues that I talked about, the pathogens, the diseases as well. We've got problems with lack of fresh water that's hitting us at the moment. The pollution that I talked about, the pollution of our estuaries and oceans that I didn't even touch on, and this dominance of animals in the human-animal food system, the animals in our food system. And I apologise if I'm boring some of you, but I want you to think about if you had us, humans, and the cows, all the animals we eat, and our pets, and one hand of the scale, one half of the scale, on the other half of the scale we've got all the wild animals in the world. How do you think that would balance out? Just think about it in your head now, and I'm going to show you a graphic of what it looks like. And in this case it's mammals, but it's very close for all large animals other than microbes on the planet. 2% are wild animals, 98% is us and the animals that we eat. That's how much we dominate this planet. So no wonder we've got, extinction rates like never before, 1,000 times now background rates of biodiversity loss on the planet. How could it not be the case when we dominate it like that? And it's a huge proportion of that that's causing the problems is the animals. I don't know if you've seen this kind of graphic. It's quite popular now. You've got Kate Raworth talking about her donut economy, about how we need to stay inside this circle here. Here's all the blowouts for the biogeochemical flows here, nitrogen, phosphorus. These are the planetary boundaries. We need to stay inside the green area here to survive, and here's where we've blown out. But what this graphic shows really clearly is the black dots are animals. So these blowouts here, with all the black dots on it, are because of animals and animal agriculture. So what I'm trying to say here, in a long way about it, is if you want to do something about this situation that we're in planet-wise, then cutting animals out of your diet is the best thing that you can do, or drastically reducing it, because this is what's driving these the really big problems that we have. And this is the future, and we've got to think about how this affects New Zealand, because I really like this. On the back of your packet, instead of having this, well, you could still have this if you're really interested, but we need to have these planetary facts. And so you've got the greenhouse gas emissions from this product that you're buying, and the nitrogen, and the water use, and the phosphorus, and the land use conversion that's had. And is it biodiversity certified, and is it chemical certified? And I think it would have an ethical score, and this EROI is energy return on investment. And then you could pick up two products and you could compare these two things here and decide which one you're going to take. And I think, you know, a huge portion of the panic won't be able to make this choice. They'll be just eating whatever they can get their hands on. But we are aiming for this, you know, this market of rich people who can buy our superior products from Clean Green New Zealand. Then I suspect that, you know, we're going to have to work incredibly hard to look good on these areas because of our isolation and a bunch of other things that we've already destroyed on this place. So this is another one of the conundrums we have to think about as a, you know, for animal agriculture and what we do on this planet. I just love this from good mate Brian Turner. You know, that pretty much describes what we're up to here. And nature is calling in her debt at the moment, and very few of us, and if you go to that IGPS letter and read what I'm talking about there, you'll get the idea. It's my issue with trying to deal with knowing all this stuff and looking around me and seeing nothing change, seeing every bloke in New Zealand buying a big four-wheel drive ute, and, you know, everyone flying all around the world like there's no tomorrow, but knowing this stuff at the same time. I suspect this is where we are. You know, it's all good, isn't it? What are you on about, you know? I think this is so real. Anyway, so those books are for sale out there. There's also, if anybody's interested in that stuff I was talking about nitrate, I wrote a chapter in this book, and I can give you a free PDF copy of that if you email me if you don't want to buy that book. But I called it Our Deadly Nitrogen Addiction. Okay, so I wanted to...
Mike Joy, look, you've been working really hard to try and get the message out there about the state of our waterways in New Zealand. What's the most frustrating part of doing this job that you've taken on your shoulders?
I guess the most frustrating bit is that there's so few people who know about the issues. You know, the industry and the government departments that are reporting on themselves have done a really good job of minimising the actual state of the environment. And there's a huge amount of money. You know, regional councils and government have got so many more comms and PR staff than they ever had in the past. So there's a real emphasis on pushing out a lovely, happy story all the time. And so fighting against that sort of, you know, one man against all of that stuff gets tougher and tougher.
Right. Now, you were mentioning our esteemed national MP, Nick Smith. If you could have a word with him, what would you like to say?
Oh, I'd like to, you know, say, why did you fail us so badly? You know, we've got the situation now where Canterbury, you're going to have to supply, and that's the only one I know about, it might be worse than that in other parts of the country, you're going to have to give an alternative water supply, because in such a short time you've allowed the pollution of those aquifers in Canterbury to the extent where, you know, a large proportion of them exceed that limit for colorectal cancer. That's just criminal. You know, he might have had some good intentions, I don't know. He ignored a lot of the science, he threw out a lot of the science, or what he and his officials did when it came to that national policy statement. Shifting those baselines, making them weaker was just criminal as far as I'm concerned.
Right. Okay, so this new government, do you think they're going to be any better?
Look, I don't know. I think the trouble is the thing is they do understand it. They know the issues. You know, I have a lot of time for David Parker. I think he understands the problems. But it's that dilemma of, if you make the tough decisions that are necessary, then you get voted out. And so there's that real, you know, impetus to not make a hard decision and just kind of just do some little shifting, you know, rearranging the deck chairs. because then you won't upset so many people. You know, you can sort of placate some of them and you can not upset the others and take a middle line and actually achieve nothing. We need really serious radical change here, and so I hope that he's brave enough to do it, but then if he's brave enough to do it and we end up with the other lot back again, then, you know, it may not be a good outcome. I know it's a tough thing, and that's why it's really, really crucial that people understand just how bad things are. And this is where the whole PR thing is actually really, really negative, because it has people believing that we don't have a problem, and therefore they won't, or they'll oppose the kind of changes that we need to have. That's why it's dangerous having them spinning.
Our country has been selling itself as nice, clean and green.
Yeah.
Obviously, you've just blown that out of the water tonight. What would you like to say to voters about the clean, green status of this country and what they can do to improve that?
I just think I want to reiterate how important that clean, green status is. We don't deserve it, we've got it, and if we lose it, we'll never get it back again. So it's crucial. That's our value add to everything, our tourism, our everything we sell from wine to trees is that clean, green image. But you can't cheat with clean, green. You know, we're going to get found out. We are being found out. So we have to actually be clean and green if we want to have a future.
So, advice to voters?
Think about more than think about the future. Think about your kids and not about just what you want to have today. Think about the pollution that's being left for your children to have to deal with. And when you think that way, it's quite clear who you should vote for.